Hello, Brad Shuck.
What's up, Charlie? How you doing, man?
I'm good. Thanks for joining today. It's Tuesday. I was going to say Thursday. Tuesday, March 31st. Man, it is hard to know what day of the week it is right now with this pandemic.
Indeed, it is. That's right.
All of our cues we use to know our routines are all disrupted right now.
Totally.
I think one thing that helps me is just my work calendar, knowing which meeting I've got next. And I'm sure I've got the problem a lot of people have, which is having to book a lot of meetings, kind of squishing things. Because me and you, we both got kids. You can probably hear a few upstairs running around right now. Got to juggle priorities, and it's all part of it.
My calendar is on Teams, Outlook, Google. So I'm trying to find a way to mesh all that stuff together.
Well, I want to talk about you today. All things Dr. Brad Shuck, learn a little bit more about you and do a deep dive. So what I want to start with is just the big question. Why are you doing this, man? Why are you so interested in researching employee engagement and all things employee?
Yeah, man. For me, this is such a personal thing. I really believe in that the experience of work can be incredible and transformative for people. And our research is really centered around helping people live better lives through their work. And so I've spent the past decade kind of digging into the experience of engagement and have started to look at health outcomes and how connectedness impacts work and isolation impacts work and how that makes us feel and then how we respond from that. So I just really believe that work can be a really empowering experience for people. And again, it's just a personal thing for me based on my own work experience early on in my career. I knew it could be better, and I wanted to figure out what levers can I pull and what are the things that I can figure out that help leaders lead better, companies develop cultures that employees can thrive in, and where individual contributors can do their very best work.
Oh yeah, forgot to unmute there. I remember meeting you last summer in 2019, and you told me a similar story about how you're passionate about the space and what brought you to it. And I love the commitment, and I love the idea that it always comes back to just people finding their purpose, people knowing how to go home and live their personal life, and not drag the work piece home and all that. Um, Tell me, a step back from this. Where were you before you started becoming a researcher?
Yeah, so I used to work in higher education. That's how I put myself through school. And my wife and I been married to my wife for 18 years now. And early on in our marriage, we moved to Miami, Florida, and we lived that Miami life for about 5 years. And I worked in corporate HR for a very large cruise industry in Miami, and
It's a good thing you changed careers, Brad.
yeah, no doubt about it. I loved that job. It was an incredible experience for me to really get my feet wet and cut my teeth on everything human resources. And along the way, we started to implement these engagement surveys, and I wanted to know more about that. And I was going to school at Florida International, which is where I got my terminal degree from. And this idea of engagement kept kind of popping up in things that I was reading and stuff that consulting companies were doing. And so I decided to start writing papers for all of my classes on employee engagement. And I'm a really non-traditional academic. I was not a really, nobody would have voted Brad Shuck most likely to be a faculty member at any point in my career. I've been a rebel. I don't like to follow rules very much, which maybe works in my favor as a researcher because I'm willing to hear no, but I don't let no stop me. We keep kind of plugging along. The idea of engagement, nobody knew what it was back in the early 2000s. I couldn't define it, couldn't measure it really well, and so it was kind of squishy. So I took it upon myself to develop a framework for that. And we've since then, over the past decade, developed definitions and really precise measurement tools to get at this this piece of work that impacts so many things, not only inside work, but Charlie, as you mentioned a minute ago, it really impacts our home life as well. That's one of the more interesting findings for me in all of this has been that the research on employee engagement tells us that there's a spillover effect into our home life, and that the way people experience work oftentimes will create these scenarios at home. And I only have to ask the folks who may be out there listening now about an experience of work they've had that was not so good, that was pretty negative. And then, how was your home life? Were you emotionally exhausted? Were you tired? Were you maybe you took on some unhealthy habits, or you were not available for your family in the way that you would want to be? And so that's been a really interesting and defining finding for us in the research.
Very interesting. For people listening to you right now, what would be one or two kind of big meta takeaways for what your research has proven and things you've learned in the last decade?
Yeah, so the first thing is that I think most folks think you need a big engagement program. So if I'm speaking to a company, you need a big platform that's gonna cost you a whole lot of money, and I think those things sometimes can help, but really engagement is grounded in the things that we do on an everyday basis. Engagement isn't a light switch. Like I can't turn engagement off like this, right, and then turn it back on when I want it. Really, we build this in all of the little actions, the things that are easy to do and easy not to do every single day. So as leaders, we need to be mindful about that. One of the things we talk about is the idea of dignity. So dignity is a large predictor of engagement. So as a leader behavior, the way that my employees feel like I treat them with dignity, or that I treat other people with dignity, impacts whether or not I'm engaged or not. Dignity doesn't cost any money, man. It's 100% free, and it's really easy to do, right? But it's also easy not to do, because think of the remote work context we're in right now. We got lots of stuff going on, and I need to fire off a couple of emails. I mean, even this morning, this has already been an incredibly busy morning, and it's only 10:15 here Eastern time. And so you get really busy, and in that busyness, we can forget some of the things that are really important to creating connectedness, helping people feel like their work is really valued, and that really drive engagement. So that's the first thing. It's cumulative over time. The second thing is, to be engaged, I think you have to have capacity to engage. Um, one of the like basic principles of engagement is that you can't be engaged in two places at the same time. So I can't be engaged here at home and also be engaged in my workplace. I can't socially do that. I can't mentally do that. I can't really kind of emotionally do that. I like to tell the story that sometimes my wife teaches kindergarten, and she works with 25 5-year-olds all day, and she'll come home from work, and I oftentimes will work in the kitchen, and I'm typing emails, and what I'm doing is very important, and she'll stand on the door and she'll say, hey, this is what my day was like, and this we had this happen, and this happened, and this happened, and I'll keep working. Oh yeah, oh sure. And she'll say, are you did you hear anything I just said? And I'll say, yeah, of course I did. I love you. You're the most important thing in my whole life. And she'll say, well, what did I just say? And I'm busted, right? And so we tell ourselves that we can be engaged in those places multiple times. It's just not possible, man. Engagement is such an intense phenomenon that to be engaged means that we have to make some decisions. And to make some decisions, we have to have the capacity to do that. So at work, one of the things that we've been talking about a lot is, what are the leader behaviors that build capacity and that not take capacity? Some of that's process oriented, some of that's organizational structures, some of that stuff is resources, it's defining work expectations, it's making sure that we're all connected as a team and building on our strengths. But the idea of capacity right now is, pre-COVID, it was huge. Right now, it should be one of the only things people are talking about.
That's really interesting. So we're talking, obviously communication's a part of it, but really we're talking purpose, dignity, capacity. Those are some big themes here. So you've obviously met a lot of people who are also researching this across the world. Who are some other people that you would recommend people dig into, follow online to just learn more about all the things that are blooming in this field?
Yeah, so there are a couple of folks. The first is right now, a lot of folks are talking about compassion, and how compassion is impacting our space of work. Jane Dutton out of the Center for Positive Psychology up north, I think it's up at the University of Michigan, is a group that I would follow. They're incredibly practical, really solid research, good stuff. There's a gentleman by the name of Vilmar Schaffelli who works at Utrecht University over in the Netherlands, and Vilmar is a good friend of mine. And the reason I would recommend his work is he started off in occupational health and safety, and he pioneered the idea of burnout in the early 80s with his research team. So he's been doing this for a very long time. And from burnout, he kind of developed this idea of work engagement, which we talk about in our research. And so what I love about Vilmar's work is it helps us understand kind of the continuum of engagement and how that impacts things like burnout, exhaustion, depersonalization, and how I feel. So I would imagine that would be incredibly relevant research right now in the healthcare field. If I'm a healthcare leader, I want to know everything I can about burnout. I want to know everything I can about emotional exhaustion and how that's impacting outcomes like safety, people feeling like they're connected as a part of the team. Those would be things that I would focus on. The last person I recommend that people take a look at is a guy by the name of William Kahn, who works up in Boston. A lot of my own research is grounded in some of the early theories that he came up with. And he basically said that there are these three pillars of engagement. The first is meaning, and whether or not I see meaning in my work. The second is safety, physical safety, social safety, psychological safety, and then resource availability. So whether or not I have the resources to be able to do my job, or do I know the answer to a question? If I don't know the answer to a question, I don't have the resource for it, I won't raise my hand for it. So those three pillars, meaningfulness, safety, and resource availability, are really important when we're thinking about developing cultures, programs, and interventions that are driving engagement at work. So those are the three people that off the top of my head that I would encourage you to take a look at. Yeah.
Interesting for you to mention healthcare professionals with what's going on with COVID-19. I know last year before the pandemic, I came across some studies that showed burnout was particularly high in the medical profession, doctors, and it's kind of getting worse year after year. I know a personal story of some doctors that are burning out, and that's why I started looking into this. Definitely have a fear now with what's happening. It's going to just get worse, right? So I'm glad to hear you bring that point up, and we can kind of raise the alarm that we need to be thinking about those people. So bringing this back to Unitonomy, which is obviously my startup, you've been a thought leader and an advisor with us developing Org Vitals, our product that's a people analytics system where we really focus on the employee experience and we focus on performance in the context of collaboration and how the culture is performing. I would love to hear in your own words what drew you into Unitonomy and what you think about the potential.
Yeah. So let me echo the issue of burnout. I think it is particularly salient right now, and I think Unitonomy could play a huge part here. Burnout is about listening to the employee experience. It isn't about taking a snapshot. It isn't about taking a couple of pulses here and there. It really is about listening into the employee experience and how people are feeling on a day-to-day basis, and how this is fluctuating throughout the day. Another really important point about employee engagement is that you can't be engaged 100% for the rest of your life. Like it's not possible. And there's so many examples. Like I would think about the healthcare space right now of it's like running a triathlon, right? This is a war. It's a long race. We got a long way to go before we're out of this. And so at the end of a triathlon, you got to rest or your body breaks down. And so mentally in the healthcare space right now, I think that's that's really important for us to think about. I think what Unitonomy uniquely does is it listens to that experience, and then it allows a leader to understand these different matrices of how people feel like they're collaborating, how they're networked across the organization, how they are in the engagement space. Are they at or over capacity? How connected are they to the organization and to their teams? And then it gives real time information about that holistic experience. And I think that's the magic sauce here, is that my experience of work isn't one dimensional. It's dynamic, and it's multifaceted. What drew me to Unitonomy is the natural language processing and the use of AI and the engine behind it, and how it is understanding that experience and then helping leaders make better decisions in the moment, to intervene, to help, support, to connect, to communicate, to appreciate, to recognize, and to lead in a very, very different way.
Key word that you just said there is intervene. So I've had people ask me before, is Unitonomy a way to like know who you should fire? And I always say, no, that's not. You're totally missing the point if that's what you think this is. This is about intervening, reorienting people, especially when you start to see all the ways we can trigger sort of warnings of burnout, which can come in a lot of different ways, right? Sometimes it's to your point of employee engagement is starting trending in the wrong way, and you can nip that in the bud, hopefully. But other times it can be just capacity overload. If you recognize, even though engagement's strong, if capacity overload runs high for a while, that's like a car low on oil. You may not see smoke coming out of the engine yet, but it's coming. Just wait another mile or 10. Those are some examples. So it's great to hear you say that, and the passion you brought. But also, when we first started, we did what I think a lot of companies do, thinking, oh, employee engagement is the end all be all, it's sort of the bellwether of how this person feels. And I've learned that it's not. We can go so much deeper when we think about connectedness and capacity and just pure stress. And talk about what's happening right now. Medical professionals, stress has absolutely got to be skyrocketing. And that's got to be tricky to deal with.
Yeah, I think about allostatic load, right, which is something that we've kind of taken a look at with Unitonomy and Org Vitals, and that wear and tear on somebody's body. So I think about folks who are considered essential workers right now. I've seen a lot of like graphics and cartoons around like Superman giving his cape to some nurses, or Superman giving his cape to truck drivers who are moving our supply chain across the country. The stress, there's a cost for that. Like, I want to be really clear, like there will be a cost for that. And Martin Lowe brought something up on one of our first webcasts, that our legacy as an organization will be so defined by the way people feel like they're getting treated right now. And I think that's a really important point. And that load, that wear and tear on the body, and the way that we take care of each other through collaboration, through staying very connected, through being adaptable, is going to be really important as we think about how we're going to emerge out of this in the next couple of months. And it is so not business as usual. There is nothing usual about this. There is a new normal that is emerging, and it is emerging on a global scale in a way that in my lifetime, I've never seen anything like this, where there is no country, there is no community, there is no industry, there is no profession that will not be immediately impacted by this, and the long-term implications of this are going to be on an absolutely massive scale.
You put a picture in my head of maybe the superhero movie we deserve, which is not about the superhero saving the day. It's about the next day, and the superhero dealing with the post-traumatic stress, the secondary stress, the secondary trauma, as they call it, and which is a real problem that we are not very cognizant to as a culture. And I think everything that's going to happen through this pandemic, we need to start preparing and having conversations about how do we support our colleagues, our families, our friends as we adapt. Like you're saying, there is a new normal. Things are not ever going to go back, I don't think, to a post-COVID-19 world. But I think a lot of good things are going to come out of this, to just kind of end on a note of optimism here. And I'm hoping there's going to be more conversations like this. I've noticed something for about the last 4 or 5 years from the research I've been reading, from the conversations I've been involved in the sort of startup world, where people realize, hey, you can actually influence the culture. You can cultivate your work culture. We're starting to learn some methods to do that, and we realize if we need to get ahead of this as a growing company, don't just wait for culture to develop haphazardly over in the corner. Don't wait until you're a company of 500 people to then think about, hey, how do we make this place healthy to work at? Let's bake this in from the beginning. And I've heard a few people talk to me about, Unitonomy. You guys kind of were built to help support remote teams with this pandemic. What do you think about that? And I say, well, it feels like it's accelerating the remote movement, people having the flexibility to work remotely by about 5 years in the course of like a month, right? Well, I could probably say the same thing right now, that maybe what's happening in this pandemic is getting an acceleration of many years around conversations like this, where people are thinking about, we've got to think about this other aspect, back to the superhero metaphor. It's not just about doing the work and looking at the engagement of the work, but we need to be looking holistically at a much larger context of the well-being of the employee and of the team through collaboration, and starting to think, what can we do to prepare to keep this successful for the long term and not just look at short-term intervals and results.
I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree with you more. The A real quick plug here. The research that we're doing at the university is beginning to look at the health impacts of work, both the good stuff and the not so good stuff, and maybe the stuff that has no judgment but just has to get done, right? Like, how do these experiences, without passing a judgment on them, how do they impact people and their health outcomes? So things like stress, diabetes, heart disease, obesity, addiction behaviors, sleeping patterns, things like that. And so we're very excited. We've collected some pilot data around that, and have an amazing team at the University of Louisville School of Medicine, School of Public Health, and Department of Communications that's helping with that. And we're thinking about all that. Before I forget, I do want to give Charley, I think you would agree with me. We're indebted to those folks who are the essential workers today. I have lots of medical faculty, nurses, CNAs, people that work in hospitals and pharmacies on my own Facebook feed and LinkedIn who I'm reading these just gut-wrenching stories from. To the truckers who are keeping our supply lines open, to the grocery store clerks who are scanning our groceries, to the folks who are restocking shelves. Guys, we're just incredibly indebted to you guys. This country would not operate without you, and we are thinking about you all the time.
Really well said. And I also don't want to leave out the custodians, like the people, especially in the hospitals, that are doing their best to keep the environment sterilized, so all the frontline emergency workers can perform their jobs and feel safe, or safe as they can possibly feel what's going on. That is a really nice way to end the show. I got one last question for you, just to keep it a little lighter here. Tell me, what's your favorite distraction right now?
My favorite distraction right now is game night here at our house. So I think I may have shared with you, we've opened the Shuck School for Reading, Arts, and Fort Building here at the Shuck House, and we have a family game night. Uno Attack is pretty heated and competitive. Yesterday we opened up a 750-piece puzzle, and which is a little challenge for us, which is good. So right now, man, my favorite distraction is just being here with my family, hanging out with with my wife and my daughter, and spending time just kind of goofing off, having fun, keeping it light. And you know what? We haven't laughed this much in a long, long time. It's been a long time since we've kind of come together like this for many, many days in a row and just laughed and had fun.
That's inspiring and a great answer. Being a game designer, definitely that's the right way to do it if you're me. Well, Brad, thank you so much for this time. So awesome listening to you and your stories and all the things that you're passionate about. So really appreciate it. And we'll be doing this again. Thank you so much, man.
Bye, guys.
Bye.